Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, I want to talk about the recruitment process and where things are at this point in the year. I also want to speak about a few players that there has been progress on and give some actual names there. Some updates on the work going on in the background personnel-wise, as well as the stadium, analytics, and more. So let's get into it. Okay, so first and foremost, I try to do this pretty much every year. If you've been watching these videos, I don't know how many years it's been that I've been doing them now. 2 years? I don't know. This might be the third year of doing this. But every year around this time, I like to, be it on video or when it was a podcast or in just in posts or such, talk about the process that United go through in recruitment and where things generally are at this time of year. Obviously, the work for recruitment begins way back earlier in the summer prior or even multiple summers back in the instance where they're not able to acquire all the players that they need for this summer, which is almost always the case. From summer through about December, January, and can depend on whether they feel that they can get any transfers done in January. Obviously, that was not the case, so it makes this year a little bit simpler. But from summer onwards, they're scouting, and they're tending to build up these big lists for the positions of need for the most part. Maybe there's 10, 15, 20 names on that list, and you'll start to see reports about this. You'll see reports about scouting. You'll see that. You get a lot of links and a very big list based on that. That doesn't mean that they're going to pursue those players. As they move into usually January, but it can depend on how early they want to start business. And I will tell you that this year they have started early in preparation for summer. I've mentioned that in some recent videos, but I know for a fact that they have been working on things ahead of summer, even as early as January, in direct things to line it up. But starting between somewhere in the range of January to March, depending on the year, they will then start to speak to agents, speak to representatives of players to start getting an idea of the players that they really want. They'll talk to a lot of them, but they'll mostly focus on the ones they've decided based on scouting would potentially be suitable. They start to work out their hierarchy in terms of the players that are the best, and then they'll start to talk to those player representatives from each position to start to narrow down things like, is the player interested in joining United? What kind of wages are they on? What is their situation coming into summer? And some other basic questions depending on things, just to get a general gist of the picture. And based on, of course, that information, that's going to allow them to start to really narrow the list down further and build them in the proper order, position by position, need by need, and start to work on that plan. With a lot of that data gathered, they're going to get together. They're going to start to put this information together, to analyze it, to work out the specific plan, then to say, okay, well, if all our right-wing targets are 100 million and our center backs are this, maybe we do what we can to work this, that, the priorities, everything, and start to nail it all down. Because though there are positional targets and such, they also obviously have to factor in, if you buy 100 million right winger, then you can't really buy 100 million center back. Which one's more important? Even among those targets, you might have your right wing choices, but how much more important is that right winger versus your top CB target, and etc. I think you can kind of get the concept in there. And so, of course, there's going to be positions that maybe have a little bit more priority and a little bit more budget wanting to be put towards them. So generally, when I'm talking about names that I've talked about over the last some time, some of them are scouting targets, but a lot of times I'm trying to narrow it down into ones that I understand are also being considered for these short lists and pushed into those kind of short lists. Now, once they've made that decision and they're narrowing it down to those few players, then usually between March and May, they start to actually have further conversations with the players, start to make some basic inquiries to the clubs. A lot of the deals can be done even via agents, getting prices, getting all of that, having them be the go-between with the club. They want to have permission to talk to the players. Example, last year, they had conversations directly with Mason Mount, Erik ten Hag, as early as April, and had direct meetings in May, I believe, ahead of lining up that deal. They did the same thing for Rasmus Højlund. They had a lot of the information that might be needed to line up that deal as early as April and May. And even Andre Onana, though it didn't appear so, my understanding is he had already let some of his teammates know that he was potentially going to move even a bit earlier than people think. A lot of those conversations happened earlier. Of course, the problem that you have in prior summers is a four-letter word that starts with J, ends with OL. That would hold up the moves for these players from happening right at the beginning of summer and make things slow down and kind of mess with everything. That is no longer a problem, and we shouldn't expect that to be a problem this summer. The other factors, of course, if those lists and the people you're targeting and the people you're building out are going to be listened to and are going to be approved and are going to be allowed and are not going to be negated by the CEO or the owners or anything like that, that should also not be an issue. So United have been working through these steps and are actually, as I understand it, already in the process of having contacted many players, kind of organizing and ready to move forward with, maybe not yet, but they're getting prepared to move forward with more direct conversations with player representatives to start lining these deals up for summer. And as I do understand it, again, I said this before, famous last words, but they are actually people who have been identified by scouts, analysts, all of that. And again, as my understanding, that there's a view that there's a lot of good people in those areas who are capable of identifying and acquiring good players. It's more a matter of that they haven't had the the resources, or the ability to get that done. So let's talk about players. Well, I've linked quite a few players in the past when I talk about positions that are being looked at. My understanding certainly is that they are pursuing the right wing position of interest. I've been talking about Michael Olise for a long time, and I believe that is a player that, as of present, they're still definitely very interested in. That contacts, at least preliminary contacts, have been made. One of the positives with Michael Olise is there's a view that he would definitely choose Manchester United over any other option. He has a release clause this summer, which could potentially make that deal pretty straightforward. In a lot of instances, I think this is a very likely deal because of that. That aspect of it is not information. The information being that I'm quite positive that he has indicated his preference to join Manchester United over any other options this summer if that were to be on the table, and that there has been contact, but there's a release clause. And it's not that significant. I think it's more in the range of 50-55 million, but you also then have the ability to negotiate, obviously, a more structured deal. But I think that's where you can get some really good value. And right now, I'm not saying there's not other ones that they've contacted, but I'm aware of this one. And there's a lot of good indications for it being potentially the most likely signing for that position. Not the most likely signing for summer, because I don't know what they're going to pursue as a priority in terms of individuals, but for that area, I would say right now, I would think it's the most likely signing. That's my opinion, but the information I presented is there. The other player that I would like to talk about then is Gerard Braithwaite. This is one I've talked about quite a lot as a player that United have admired for a long time. They made contacts over him last year, and I believe that they have made contacts with representatives around him already this year to gauge the player's interest, to gauge the potentiality of a move. And I think there are good signs here, and I would expect that it's a player that they will end up at least pursuing towards, closer towards getting the full costs, prices, things like that, and weighing up if it's a viable move. But yeah, I do think that is definitely looking like a name. the positives of that, though I don't have specifics on many other players, are most of the names, those are two names I've been hearing for a while, and they are two names it sounds like they are moving forward with. And to me, that's a very good sign, because I know, where this comes from. And no matter what, whether they're right signings or wrong signings, you do need to have cohesiveness where people who are in the job are the ones presenting this information. So that's a good sign. Two players to keep an eye on. There's going to be certainly more, but building out more names and people and lists and things like that, but also names that I've said previously I think are being followed up on. So that would be good to know. Obviously in the past we've talked about names like Silva at center back, talked about names in the midfield, Palacios, Onana. I think that there's likely follow-up occurring, across other names that we've heard too. But I can't be specific because I don't have the information as I do with these other two players to the level of certainty to say that they've been contacted, or the representatives. I want to make that clear. Representatives have been contacted. So in the discussion of personnel, obviously, what does that mean? Well, there's people at United right now, not only scouting, analytics, working on things, but making contacts, doing things, all of that. It's all happening. And the question has been, well, if you don't have Dan Ashworth in and you don't have these other people in, can that happen? And is it happening right? And the answer is absolutely yes. There's obviously conversations that can occur otherwise. There's obviously also the factor, Ineos have been preparing for this for a long time. Now they're at United. They're not going into this blind. They have also an entire other football club with a lot of data and people that they can rely on. They have Jean-Claude Blanc, and they have conversations with people, whether it's in a more formal setting when it comes to Omar Barada, Dan Ashworth, and others in terms of what they want to do. They are moving forward on the deals for personnel behind the scenes. I think that in some cases they want it to be more like with Barada, where it came out of the blue. With Jason Wilcox, the name is already out there, but at the same time, it doesn't have the sort of mess that you're hearing around Dan Ashworth. And, I wouldn't really worry about those deals, as well as the other person that they'll likely want to hire that I mentioned there. But in the meantime, there are people who are at the club, who've been at the club, that are doing the job as instructed by people overhead and working on these deals. That also ties into managers. Obviously, there's been a whole lot of stories, and I meant to touch on it in my last video, but I think the stories were coming out while I was discussing it. If they were to change managers, this isn't something I'm talking about like within the last week or so in terms of making a decision, okay? So I want to eliminate that part of it. If they were to change managers, and they have looked at contingencies in the past, I've talked about this way back in October, they have people assessing these things, and they have people to assess these things. It's not going to be Jim Ratcliffe's opinion on it. There's Omar Barada, there's Jean-Claude Blanc involved, and there's a lot of people that they spoke with otherwise in terms of assessing it. But what I want to say is that my understanding of things is either way, it has been, if they were to change managers, and if that was to happen, and this has been true for all this time, it's not decided who it would be. They didn't decide in January it's Graham Potter. They didn't decide in February it's this guy and they're offering him the job. None of that has happened. None of that has occurred. They will, if that is the case, the intention was always, once that decision was made, whether to stick or twist with Erik ten Hag, that they would be conducting a lot more research, data, and involvement into deciding the right course of action. And that is, in addition to other things, another reason why they likely will not sack Erik ten Hag mid-season, regardless of the future, whether they decide to change him or whether they decide to not, why he will very likely be here through the end of the season, period, is if they are deciding to make a change, then they will want to formally move forward in that process, talking to people, contacting people, and going through things a bit more officially, and give themselves time to make those decisions, because they're doing a lot of stuff. I mean, you look at the stadium, such that's come out. I've given my opinion on that that I think there should be a new stadium. I think that's the opinion of Sir Jim Ratcliffe and the people involved, based on what's being said. But I'm not saying it's correct or to denigrate or discourage other opinions on that. That's just mine. There's a lot of things being done there. And then in addition, you saw the story about them working with or talking to Ludonautics, the company that's owned by or run by Graham and Edwards. And Edwards may be returning to Liverpool. But point being, they're aware of the fact that it might take a while to get people in place, and they have decisions to make on players, managers. They've been aware of this for a while. There's other resources for making proper decision making, including companies like Ludonautics that advise a lot of clubs. There are other outside the box ideas that can be done that give them the ability to give them extra eyes, extra resources, and extra data and input from people who know what they're doing to make these decisions, regardless of whether they have their own people in place within the club yet. So bear that in mind, because that is a factor and that is a part of it, and they have been thinking with this. They're not going in blind, and we're not having a summer that's based on, Jim Ratcliffe's opinion on whether Erik ten Hag should stay or go, Jim Ratcliffe's opinion on who the next manager should be, and Jim Ratcliffe's opinion on players. That's not happening. That's not how they operate, and they're well aware of all of that. So I wanted to just cover all of those things and make it pretty clear. I think it's important to gather the context surrounding all of this. In terms of Everton at the weekend, obviously a really big game in terms of Champions League. It's kind of scary because in some ways the season could be over. With a loss or a bad result at Everton, with Tottenham picking up points if they do, and then the following weekend the FA Cup against Liverpool, which unfortunately I think they'll be full. I don't know if it's the following weekend, but later on with Liverpool, I think they'll be full strength because they're up. When is that game? I'm sorry, but they're up. They're up. 5. Yeah, no, it is the following weekend. Yeah, it is the following weekend. They're up 5-1 in their Europa tie, so when they play Thursday, it's likely to be kids. Which means I think on Sunday, March 17th, we're getting the full-strength Liverpool team. But between the Everton and Liverpool game, it's huge as to whether the season is even over or not in March. And so I think, obviously United are going to have to pretty much give their all. It's definitely no guarantee fifth gets that coefficient right now based on the way the results are going too, which could make it even worse. But if that happens and if they lose those games and it goes poorly, maybe you'll see more official things in terms of decisions and all of that coming out. But obviously they don't want to disrupt things in the meantime. So big game at the weekend for sure. And ideally, United can win and stay in this Champions League race. But I think it's a must win in that regard. Okay, that's what I have for today. I wanted to share. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. I'll see you in the next video.